Welcome to the Visa Solutions Australia Fortnightly webinar. Thanks for joining me. For those that haven't met me previously, I'm Andrew Emmett. I'm the Director of Immigration Services here at Visa Solutions. I'm a senior practitioner within the Australian immigration industry, and I have over 18 years of experience as a registered migration agent. Now this week I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to share some of my experiences over those 18 years regarding applications that involved very compelling circumstances and perhaps some of the more complex legal situations that we've dealt with, where we've been able to provide a sophisticated solution and help change people's lives. So it's not the normal visa application process per se, but just some of the more interesting cases that we've had over the years. Let me know if you've got any questions, and if we've got time I'll cover some of them at the end of the presentation. Otherwise I'll crack straight on. Okay, so the first case I want to mention, of course I'm not going to mention any individuals' names, but I am going to give an overview of the situation so you've got an understanding of exactly what was going on. So the first case was, ranged over a period of about 10 years. We had a lady who came to us. She was a student in Australia, originally from Mauritius, and she came over to Australia with her family, with her husband and 2 sons. She was studying a course at TAFE here in Perth, and on completion of her course she applied for skilled migration under what back then was one of the general skilled migration applications with sponsorship. Her occupation was one of those that didn't get any sort of priority processing, and it dragged on and on and on for about 5 years before it got looked at by the Department of Immigration. In that time, sadly, she developed cancer, and when the application was eventually considered by the Department of Immigration, it was eventually refused on health grounds. We appealed that decision to the Migration Review Tribunal, as it was back then. That took another year. That was also again refused, and eventually we ended up appealing the decision to the Minister for Immigration. That's effectively as high as you can go without going through to the High Courts. So this whole process had taken so far around about 8 years. When this family came to Australia, the 2 boys were respectively, I think, 5 and a year and a half. So they'd grown up in Australia. The youngest ones spoke no French, which is the first language in Mauritius. They'd only ever known living in Australia. And here we were faced with an application that was going to get refused on health grounds and for the family to be sent back home. Even worse, if the main applicant, the lady in this case, if she passed away through her illness, the application for the husband and the kids would also be refused, because the basis for the lodgement of the application, in other words, her qualifications and so on, would mean that the application would no longer continue. So we appealed the application to the Minister's office. In the meantime, the lady's medical condition continued to get worse and worse and worse, to the point that it was very obvious that she was dying. We eventually managed to get some support from the Minister's office on the basis that she was not going to be surviving for very much longer. And we made a very compelling argument to the Minister that he needed to look at this application very urgently, given the long-term stay of the family in Australia and the rather tragic circumstances. The Minister granted the visa for the primary applicant a few days before she passed away, and we were at least able to tell her the good news that she had had her own visa granted. She was very grateful, but also very upset that it really wasn't about her at that point in time. It was all about getting the visas for her husband and for her kids. And their visas were not granted at the same time as her own, simply because they needed to do new health checks and new police clearances. So we had a rush round to get those organised, and eventually the visas for the husband and the children were granted. I phoned up the family, and I found, this broke my heart, I found that I'd missed her. She'd passed away about 10 minutes prior to the visas for the husband and the family having their visas granted. So we were able to get the desired end result, the visa for the lady concerned and the visas for the husband and the kids. They're still here as permanent residents and now citizens after a very long fight and very difficult circumstances. Dan Engels and myself went along to the funeral. We sat at the back of the Catholic Mass, and her sister talked very eloquently about this lady's sort of long quest to obtain permanent residency for herself and her family, and talked about the work that we'd done. It was very moving. It was very humbling, and you know, it was a result to be proud of, but it certainly didn't feel like it under the circumstances. In you know, the lady sort of had to pass away for us to get that outcome. So, you know, it's an example of a situation where you can get the right outcome if you've got the support from the minister's office. Work goes in, and you know, you get the permanent resident visa in, you know, really the worst possible circumstances. On a slightly lighter note, I suppose, I did an application also 6 or 7 years back for a Vietnamese farm mechanic. He was working for one of our corporate clients in the northern suburbs in Perth, and he didn't speak any English. We were making an application for permanent residency for him, and the application was refused on the basis that he didn't meet the normal English language requirement. We appealed that application to the Migration Review Tribunal, and we provided, again, a very detailed submission that explained why in his position he really did not need to speak any English at all. He was working on a fleet of farm equipment. He went to work, he looked after this equipment, he went home again. He was an excellent mechanic, and you know, he didn't really need to communicate on a regular basis with anyone other than farm management, who were of the same ethnic heritage as he was. The Department of Immigration, in their original decision, had been concerned about any occupational health and safety requirements, how we would deal with emergency services if in the event of an explosion or a fire or whatever. And we'd organised for the employer to have a translator to hand if he ever needed one, to cover that scenario where all the health and safety notices around the site were in English and in his home language. And the Migration Review Tribunal decided that that was a fair solution under the circumstances, and were able to grant his permanent resident visa. So again, a good outcome where the applicant didn't normally meet the standard English language requirement for that particular visa category. I'll give you one more, just checking my time, give you one more brief one. I did an application probably 10 years ago, this one, for a US citizen who had a substantial criminal record. He had come to Australia on a visitor visa with his Australian wife. They'd had children together. His criminal record went back to when he was a young man, having grown up in the United States. And he also didn't declare his convictions on his landing card when he arrived in Australia. We lodged the application for the partner visa based on the relationship with his Australian wife, and the application eventually got referred to the Department of Immigration Character Unit, who asked for a further submission about why the visa should not be refused on character grounds. His criminal record, by the way, was some 18 years of imprisonment for what under Australian standards, I suppose, might be seen as relatively minor offences in the scheme of things. It was burglary and housebreaking. I think 2 offences. He was, as I say, these offences occurred when he was 18 years old and 20 years old, growing up as a young black man in America, which in the late 70s, early 80s, when that was sort of standard for penalties in the United States. So in the character submission, we talked about the length of time that had elapsed between the offences and now. We talked about the different standards in sentencing. We talked about the fact that the refusal of the visa would be a significant significant hardship for his Australian wife and children, and the fact that he made significant efforts to rehabilitate himself in terms of taking running community classes and helping the local sports team and so on, doing a lot of community service work. The biggest strategic step that we did in terms of getting the right outcome on that one, the grant of the visa, was recommending that when they arrived, the 2 children who were American citizens but had an Australian mother, we organised for them to be granted Australian citizenship by descent, so that when the Department of Immigration looked at the application, they were looking at a situation that if they refused the application, it was affecting the welfare of not only his wife as an Australian citizen, but his wife and 2 Australian citizen children. And eventually that application was also successful, and he was granted a permanent resident partner visa. I think that's probably enough for now. That's 3. So I've got lots of similar stories over the years. I'll perhaps do a similar sort of thing in another couple of weeks. But there's one where there was this terrible medical condition, one where there was a corporate client with an employee with no English, and one partner visa application where the application was originally going to be refused on character grounds, and we managed to overturn that. So we can help out in really the most difficult circumstances. We understand the difficulty that you're going through with your visa application, or that your employees or family members are going through. We'll assist you with the preparation. We'll develop a strategy to get the best possible outcome. These type of applications, it's expensive to lodge a visa application with the Department of Immigration. You want to give yourself the best possible chance of success, and we'll work with you one-on-one to get you through those complex circumstances and give yourself every opportunity to get the visa that you need. So do get in touch with us. Give us a call. We're here to change lives. Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. See you in a couple of weeks.